The corporate media obsess over the minutia of Trump's health after propping up human corpse Joe Biden for years. Plus, how many ways is hormonal birth control screwing up your body? And are marriage and motherhood really a drag? All that and more on the Kylee Cast. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Kylee Cast. I am Kylee Griswold, managing editor at The Federalist. Please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And better yet, if you're just listening to the show, be sure to check out the full video version on my personal YouTube channel or the Federalist channel on Rumble. If you'd like to email the show, as always, you can do so at radio@thefederalist.com. We always love to hear from you. So it turns out Donald Trump is not dead, no matter how much rabid anti-Trump media and Tim Walz wish he were.
You get up in the morning and you doom scroll through things, and although I will say this, the last few days you woke up thinking there might be news. Just saying. There will be news sometime, just so you know, there will be news.
The New York Times is out with a piece this week from Katie Rogers heralding this news that should be obvious: Trump is alive, but she does more than that. She takes a deep dive into the minutia of Trump's bill of health, including his high cholesterol, a bruise he has, and the fact that he takes aspirin and sometimes asks reporters to repeat themselves if he's in a large room with lots of background noise and doesn't hear them the first time. Really hard-hitting journalism here. But if you look super closely, you might just catch a slight difference in the way the media are covering Trump's health versus how they covered Biden's health just a few years ago. Rogers writes, quote, "For years, justifiable concerns and questions about Mr. Trump's health have often been met with obfuscation or minimal explanation from the people around him. Mr. Trump's physicians have not taken questions from reporters in years, and there were no medical briefings held after an assassination attempt against him in Butler, Pennsylvania last summer." End quote. Not to mention, sometimes Trump covers up a bruise on his hand, and you can tell because he uses slightly the wrong shade of Maybelline, New York. It's all part of a cover-up, you see. This is some really good investigative work there. Meanwhile, when Joe Biden was 9 months older than Trump is now, the New York Times went with this framing for the former president. Quote, "President Biden is turning 80. Experts say age is more than a number." End quote. Seriously, get a load of this. Quote, "But when the risk of life-threatening diseases, dementia, and death rises faster with each passing decade of a person's life, experts in geriatrics say that people in their 80s who are active, engaged, and have a sense of purpose can remain productive and healthy, and that wisdom and experience are important factors to consider." The New York Times spoke to 10 experts in aging to paint a picture of what the next 6 years might look like for a person of the president's age. Speaking of Joe Biden, of course. These experts have not examined or treated Mr. Biden, though they have looked at publicly available information, including a medical report issued by the White House last year, a day before his 79th birthday. Mr. Biden, these experts agreed, has a lot going in his favor. He is highly educated, has plenty of social interaction, a stimulating job that requires a lot of thinking, is married, and has a strong family network. All factors that, studies show, are protective against dementia and conducive to healthy aging. He does not smoke or drink alcohol, and according to the White House, he exercises 5 times a week. He also has top-notch medical care. End quote. Oh, well, if the experts say so, the Times continued, quote, "Scientists who study aging stress that chronological age is not the same as biological age. In people who are active, experts say," they are the experts again, "the brain continues to evolve and some brain functions can even improve." End quote. Here's another from the New York Times in February of 2023 with the headline, quote, "Biden's doctor says he is healthy and vigorous." Here it goes, quote, "Administration officials and others who meet with him privately say he asks pointed, relevant questions and engages in lengthy, sometimes highly detailed discussions about the policy challenges facing the country. Reassurances from the president's doctor and top aides are unlikely to significantly ease concerns among some of his supporters. And Republicans are poised to use the president's age as a political vulnerability no matter what his doctors say." end quote. In other words, Biden is doing amazing. He's sharp as ever, but Republicans will pounce. Here's an Axios headline from October 2023, quote, Trump has his own age problem as he mocks 80-year-old Biden's fitness, end quote. And here's the lead. Quote, Joe Biden's age is a big theme of the 2024 campaign. But if Donald Trump wins the presidency, he'd also be the oldest person ever to be inaugurated. And his campaign has disclosed far less about his health than the White House has about the president, end quote. The kicker is, this article was written the exact same month as Biden's infamous interview with special counsel Robert Hur about his classified documents scandal. You know, the interview that led Hur not to recommend charges to the Department of Justice, in part because he said, quote, Biden would likely present himself to the jury as he did during our interview with him as a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory, end quote. According to Hur's report, remember, Biden couldn't remember significant facts in their interview, like when he was vice president or even when his son Beau had died. Hur said Biden's memory, quote, appeared to have significant limitations, end quote. But it gets even better. This Axios article is written by none other than Alex Thompson, who co-authored the book Original Sin with Jake Tapper about President Biden's decline and its cover-up. Kind of seems like you were in on the cover-up there, Alex. This is par for the course for the corporate media. They lie, and they lie, and they lie some more. It's why they noted after the latest transgender school shooting last week that Donald Trump had been written on the gun, as if to suggest that the killer was a pro-Trump fanatic, even though what the gun actually said was, kill Donald Trump. It's why they churn out bogus fact checks that add ridiculous context. It's why they parrot terrorist propaganda from the Gaza Health Ministry, rely on anonymous sources and so-called experts, and why they hide blockbuster news under boring headlines and give nothing burger news the most salacious headlines imaginable. Because for legacy media, it's not about telling the truth. It's about doing the best darn public relations for Democrats they possibly can. You know, maybe the fact that Trump is the president they have to write about once again tells you a little something about how that PR is going. It's a day ending in Y, so the corporate media are out in full force with their absolute worst feminist takes on marriage, sex, birth control, parenthood, you name it. Here to discuss why the media scolds are wrong, as usual, are Federalist executive editor Joy Pullmann and Federalist assignment editor Elle Purnell, who you've seen before. She's a favorite, and she's back. Welcome to both of you.
Good to see you, Kylie.
Thanks.
Great to have you. So I want to start talking about a birth control article that I saw this week from the New York Times that really, it kind of stopped me in my tracks. It was kind of a rough, weird article. Here's what it was called. Who am I without birth control? Which is crazy that there are so many women now who have to ask that question. And this article, it follows a woman who had been on hormonal birth control for a decade. And she goes off of it to see who she is without it, which, again, is a valid question. If our hormones help determine who we are, our personalities and the way that we act and the way that we think, then if you've been on this cocktail of synthetic hormones for a decade, you might wonder who you are without them. And so she comes off these hormonal birth control pills and she has a baby. And the New York Times author then talks about lots of birth control misinformation, which a lot of it is not misinformation at all. It's very valid concerns that women have and things that have been demonstrably true side effects of hormonal birth control. And then she ends the article by painting this dire picture of motherhood using the woman who is the subject of the article, and she's just had her baby. And in the end, she reveals that she goes back on hormonal birth control anyway, even though she felt better off of it because, quote, I don't want to get pregnant again, end quote. Just a really crazy and sad story, but also pretty eye-opening because it talks a lot about how many women are feeling. Women are going into clinics all of the time saying, hey, I saw this thing on social media, or I'm on birth control and I don't like how it's making me feel. And I had some of these experiences too, where I got to the point after being on hormonal birth control for not even that long to treat something that had nothing to do with contraception, And shortly after I got married, I realized I don't feel anything like myself. This isn't me. And there's no explanation for it except for this one little pill that I ingest every day. There's a lot of women that feel that way. And I'm curious how both of you felt after reading the article, maybe what resonated with you, and also what propaganda did you see in the article? Elle, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I mean, the article opens describing this young lady, Ashley's experience with the doctor. And the way that the New York Times describes it, I don't know that they intended this to be so obvious, but it's very obvious that the doctor is pressuring her.
Mm-hmm.
Doctor keeps saying, well, what do you mean? Why are you trying to get off birth control? Well, why would you do that? Why on earth would you choose to stop putting the synthetic hormone in your body if it's not making you violently ill every day?
Mm-hmm.
So that was striking, just kind of the way that the New York Times just accepted that was the way that the medical establishment treats women and questions women. And then the other thing was the article is obviously trying to paint this picture of this woman. She was on birth control, on hormonal birth control, and then decided to come off of it. Oops, she got pregnant, and she, that was this like negative consequence of her irresponsible decision, and then she goes back on it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, didn't it say in the article that didn't she admit that she wasn't, without getting too graphic detail, that she wasn't really trying an alternative?
That's correct.
It's kind of funny. It's so clear that the New York Times is trying to paint this as hormonal contraception is the only option for women, and then it very much was not the case. What they were trying to portray of this woman was trying very hard, not to get pregnant, and then whoops. But yeah, I mean, they portrayed her getting pregnant as this horrible, worst possible option, which, I mean, it sounds like you kind of have to piece together with an outlet like the New York Times, figure out how the person actually feels and what the full story is, because the New York Times will cherry pick what they say, kind of paint their preferred narrative. And so if you kind of read between those lines, it doesn't sound like this woman is devastated at the fact that she has a child, as much as the New York Times is trying to paint her that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, their quotes that they used at the end when they talk about her pregnancy are very selective. Very, very interesting. Joy, what was your thought after reading the piece? And also, I think you've dug in somewhat to the side effects, the very real side effects of birth control. And in the article, it paints a lot of these things as misinformation, but they're absolutely not. Anxiety, depression. I mean, the list goes on and on. Very serious health issues. So that really stood out to me, and I assume it probably did for you too.
Yeah, that was one of the things that stood out to me, especially since, and not to put too fine a point on it, I have a little bit more life experience than both of you. So I have more years of accumulated experiences with girlfriends, getting really, gritty about talking about our challenges with hormones, health, fertility, all of those issues, so, I mean, so I'm thinking, 20 years of that for me. I know a lot of young women just like you who are using the pill who have used or are using it for not contraceptive reasons, but because to deal with other kind of issues that they have. And I mean, but the problem is, as you mentioned, it does have a lot of side effects. And I thought the New York Times article really was kind of speaking about both sides of its mouth there, because they were struggling to both kind of, I mean, they mentioned, oh, it says on the side effects list that all of these things will happen, right? So it is confirmed by this very people who are selling these birth control products to people that they have to put, on the warning label, the actual potential negative consequences of having birth control, hormonal birth control, which do include, weight fluctuations, mood changes, anxiety, which of course can have all kinds of ramifications, such as kind of problems with your partner or with your family, or changing who you feel like you are. And so while the New York Times really wants you to take away that you should be on hormonal birth control, it also has to kind of begrudgingly admit that there are these real legitimate issues that women do have while taking that synthetic array of hormones, and they can mess with many other aspects of not just your health, but of course, since your health is part of who you are as a person. And so I've seen that kind of experience. Women will talk about this privately, and I really find it really shameful that the New York Times would really join with a certain, kind of group, basically big pharma, and really kind of telling women that their own perceptions and their feelings and their experiences are not real, that they must be in their head, they're faking them, they're making them up. because, you know, the quote unquote science, you know, tells you that. I mean, women do, and not only do women have legitimate experiences that, like you said, you know, I'm on the pill, I have these changes happen. I'm off the pill, the changes go away, right? But also there are, you know, mainstream, well-regarded, best-selling New York Times authors who are doctors who have built entire careers on helping women detox from having used hormonal birth control, dealing with the side effects and sometimes the lifelong consequences of really trying to interrupt what is and should be a completely natural process for a woman of having a cycle. And so, well, I like everyone, right? Fertility is both a blessing and a challenge. It is really, you know, baby is a really big commitment. And so, you know, people really want to have a lot more handle on that commitment than we really actually do. It is a part of life that is really, you know, we have so many other things that we can manicure and control and AI out, but we still really can barely suppress, you know, what nature does with women's bodies, which is make babies, you know, if you're healthy, or, you know, if you're not able to make babies, typically your body is in a really bad state of health, and that's something that you want to fix as well, right? Fertility is a sign of health for men and for women. And so we should all really want to be as fertile as possible just in order to really live our best lives inside our body. So, but the point of that being, you know, I really don't like the denial of women's experiences because they're not just in their head, it is in their bodies. There are biological changes and markers that are well documented, even in the warning labels on these products, you know, and like I said, there's an entire industry of credentialed doctors who are helping women deal with these side effects. And, you know, and women are seeking that sort of information because we don't like those side effects and having to deal with them. So, you know, right. So, but sometimes maybe the hormonal birth control can solve one problem, which I don't like Elle said, the idea of casting a baby as a problem is really problematic for me. And, you know, but so, you know, that is a major part of this, as you mentioned, the really anti-life. And I think being anti-fertility is also being anti-woman, because women we have the wombs, right? Womb and, right? It's right in the word. We are the ones who gestate and grow new life. And so if you're trying to neuter and deny that capacity, you're really trying to neuter what it is to be a female human being.
Right. But it's not even just casting pregnancy or having a baby as something that's a problem to be avoided. It's also those hormonal fluctuations that you mentioned. And there's something really beautiful and conservative about saying the truth that women's hormonal fluctuations are actually good and normal and healthy. And, you know, there are incentives in corporate America and among feminists and, you know, the people selling the pill to basically even out women and make them more like men and give them these synthetic hormones that sort of flatten all of those fluctuations, and they make us infertile, yes, but either while we're on the pill, but then also sometimes for women, those effects are lasting. But it also makes us more like men. And I heard a really interesting podcast. I heard it quite a while ago, but I re-listened to it recently with Jordan Peterson and Dr. Sarah Hill. And she talks about the fact that men and others will often paint women as dramatic or hormonal or unpredictable. And she talks about the fact that that's a very male-centric way to look at how hormones function, because women are actually very predictable. She said, if you bring in a woman and you tell me her age and you tell me her last menstrual cycle, the dates of that, she's like, I can tell you exactly what's happening in that woman's body and with her hormones. But if you bring in a man, she can't tell anything about what's happening with his hormones, because men's testosterone fluctuates based on, you know, what they've eaten or what they just saw, you know, it's or whether their sports team just won or lost. You know, women's hormonal fluctuations are beautiful, and there's like an incredibly wonderful and profound and like beautifully creative thing about the way our bodies function that just gets completely taken out when you put hormonal birth control into the equation. Elle, I think I cut you off.
And I will say, as a mother, I noticed, I mean, there is something about kind of the cyclical nature of I mean, just growing life and being involved with life, right? So, you know, I was talking with a friend about this the other day, friend of the podcast, but I won't name since it was a private conversation. But we were talking about kind of the change of having, you know, basically your young kids grow into teenagers and then head off to college. And the comment that she made to me was, you know, a friend of mine who was just a couple years ahead of us in this stage, you know, basically said, oh, it's kind of like the newborn stage again. And for me, having been through the newborn stage 6 times, I know exactly what that means. The newborn, you know, so, you know, babies basically change. You're basically just like women, you're always trying to just stay ahead of the next change with the baby, right? So first there, you know, for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, They're sleeping this way. And then just as soon as you think, I understand what the baby's doing, this is the pattern, then the baby changes, right? Teething is happening, some growth in, neural development. And it's the same thing as a mother. It may not be, I think it kind of evens out and lengthens a little bit as the children grow older. But, with every single child, they have their own life cycle. They have, they're in one child may be in a challenging point in life period, and you have to kind of lean into that and help that child and support them and think about where they are now. Another child may be doing really great in a certain, that in the same family, same environment, but that the other child may be doing really great and having the best time of it for, a couple months until he's going to run into his roadblock. So life is way, way more, cyclical, and it involves a lot of waves and things that you just have to be kind of ready to pivot to. And that's one of the things that I think women having this sort of a, ocean-like nature, ebbs and flows and tides and sort of things, I think we may be, better suited for handling that sort of thing, or being at least, instinctively aware of the ebb and flow that comes with a normal life in a family, than men who are more constant productivity, always on, straightforward, etc. And by the way, my husband just mentioned to me, he learned men have a cycle too, but it's a daily cycle. Where women have a monthly cycle, men have a daily one. And so I just think, that really, things like that, those little scientific facts do tell us something about the differences between men and women and the ways that we can work together for the good of everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to pivot to another article I saw this week about marriage, as you mentioned, your husband, Joy. But this one specifically relates to Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. And I'm sorry for bringing up Taylor Swift 2 weeks in a row, but I couldn't help it. It's MSNBC's fault. Their headline is Taylor Swift. Here, let me pull it up for us here. Taylor Swift's about to find out what a lot of married women already know. And then it goes on to say, in many ways, marriage creates more problems than it solves. Hot take. No one knows that more than, well, people who are married. Elle, you wrote on this, so I want to get your thoughts. But I just have to say, I was appalled at how negatively this author, her name is Christina Wyman, how negatively she paints her own marriage and just sort of shrugs at her husband. She says negative things about him and can't really say all that much positive. I would love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, my thoughts are similar to yours, I think. I mean, she says she's happily married, which, I see the headline and lead of that article, and I think oh, maybe this is from a woman who's never been married, or is in a very unhappy one. But she says she's happily married, but then she goes on to talk about how disappointing her marriage is, and how single women are happier than married women. And she's, kind of writing this whole article as a big red warning flag, hey, Taylor Swift, before you get married, here's what you should know. And I think it actually is important to have conversations that prepare young people, men and women, for marriage. I think a lot of people do go into marriage ill-informed, but the way to prepare them for it is not to scare them off about it being horrible, because it's not horrible. It's wonderful. And I think the mistake that a lot of people make, and I go into this in my piece, is a lot of people expect they confuse love and marriage for having a feeling of happiness in another person that makes them feel happy. And it should, marriage, your spouse should make you feel happy often. But that's not sufficient. That's a necessary but not sufficient ingredient for marriage. It's not just about marrying somebody because they make you feel good. You enter into marriage. It's a covenant. It's a relationship where you agree to each put the other person first, and you're not seeing this person as kind of a tool for your own happiness and self-satisfaction, but as someone to invest in and to mutually assist in each other's sanctification. And that's beautiful. It's very rich. It's much richer than kind of the anemic version that this author describes in the article. So I wish her and her husband the best. I hope they get the help that they need, because the way to solve problems in your marriage is not to air them in an article on MSNBC or anywhere.
Right. This is the way she describes her marriage in one particular paragraph that just stuck out to me like a sore thumb. It was so awful. She says, despite our love and commitment to each other, most of our days together are marked by drudgery, negotiation, mild arguments, odd smells, and tedium, with a healthy dose of mind-numbing irritation that has made me want to throw in the towel more times than I can recall. Yet she describes herself as happily married. And I'm just like, not that there aren't hard days or not that there aren't, disagreements or healthy conflict. I mean, that's like any relationship, but I can't say I relate to that description of what happily married looks like.
Well, I also kind of want to know what she suggests as an alternative, because she says that, so she and her husband married she was 39. And when they got engaged, she says they had been dating for 6 years. Mm-hmm. And the way that she describes it, it doesn't sound like she was content in that 6-year dating period. Like, she says that she was happy, not overjoyed. She caveats, but she wasn't overjoyed, but she was happy when her now husband proposed. But so I don't think she necessarily would prefer this kind of permanent state of dating. I don't think that she would recommend several marriages, like marriage and then divorce and then another, so I'm not sure what she thinks would be better. But it does seem clear that she's unhappy in her marriage. And from the way that she, I would wager to guess that if she's going to talk about her husband this way publicly, he's probably pretty unhappy too.
I agree. I'm also curious, and I have no way of knowing this, but she talks about the fact that they're in marriage counseling or couples therapy or something. I forget how she phrases it. And I'm just curious whether the marriage therapist that they're saying, because I am not of the belief that therapy or counseling is a vitamin. Like, I don't think it's something that everyone needs. It's something that is like very specific. I think it can actually make you more unhappy or more discontent or talk you into problems. And I wonder if that's what's happening here. Like, I don't think happily married couples need to go to marriage therapy or marriage counseling. And so I'm just curious, like, if you are actually happily married, is your therapist talking you into that?
What, Joy?
Go ahead, Joy.
Well, the thing I was thinking is like people who are in marriage counseling, which I fully support people, going and getting help if they're in a rough time. And every therapist is not a great choice. So I also recommend people maybe try out a few if they're not clicking or getting really any traction within the first couple of visits with someone. So I'm pro seeking out help, when you have difficulties in life. Although not every therapist is going to be actually that helpful. But people who are in that rough time in life really are not in a good place to be kind of opining about the value of marriage when they're clearly not doing it very well. Right. And it's just, so the same thing. If someone was really not a skilled parent, was really like needing mentoring or having someone to guide them, that's great. They should absolutely, be apprenticed and learning. But we don't ask the apprentices, the people who aren't demonstrating the skills, to be teaching the rest of people the skills that they don't have. And so, frankly, this really is one article that, the editors should never have recruited or run, because the person kind of disqualifies herself in the course of writing the article that they published.
Right. That's a great point, Joy. And I don't mean to talk badly about marriage counseling or therapy, because my point is that it's not, some people say everyone should be in therapy. And all I'm saying is I don't think that that's true. Like, I view it as a prescription drug that's there to solve a problem with an off ramp, rather than like a vitamin supplement that everyone should be taking. Correct. Because it's just like good for everyone, So anyway, but I completely agree that you shouldn't look to those people for telling you what a happy, healthy marriage necessarily looks like. She also just
real quick. Here's what I'm not a therapist, thank goodness, but just from reading the article, like, if I were seeking for a free piece of marriage advice, like, not that I'm some like long-standing marriage expert, but the way that she talks about her problems with her husband, she says, oh, we have our share of conflicts. Sure, everybody does. Like, every husband and wife have arguments that, we're sinful people. But the way that she says this, and then she describes the origin of many of their conflicts, and she describes it as like, well, I'm this assertive, confident New Yorker, and my husband is conflict avoidant. And everybody knows that conflict avoidant people are not good at handling conflict. And so because of my husband's conflict avoidance, we aren't, we weren't able to work through it. Like, she's just very clearly blaming their fights on her husband. That's not a good faith position to start from. So, if you're having a problem, it might be because you're quickly blaming it on your spouse.
Right. She's also just totally wrong about not only what marriage is for, but also the research behind marriage and happiness. She says that married people are not happier than single people, but that's just not true. And the data shows that that's not true. And there was a good reminder of that this week also with an Atlantic article written by Jean Twenge called The Marriage Effect. A common narrative has it that commitment and motherhood make women unhappy, but new data suggests the opposite is true. And Elle, in your piece, you write, according to the survey, 43% of married women without children reported that their lives were enjoyable, compared to only 34% of unmarried, childless women. For married mothers, the number was even higher at 47%. Married mothers were nearly twice as likely to report being very happy as their single, childless counterparts. And it's worth noting that this was not just a random one-off throwaway study. This was a survey of 3,000 American women between ages 25 and 55. So a pretty comprehensive study. And I think everyone here would agree that married mothers and fathers are just happier across the board than unmarried childless counterparts.
Here's maybe what this MSNBC lady needs is a baby.
Right.
Well, I think, so I followed, Dr. Twenge is really well known in social science research, and she's done a lot of really popular studies and books. So I followed her for a long time, but I think her article underscores kind of a long-standing understanding of the classic philosophers. Now, she doesn't refer to them, but it made me think of the classic Aristotelian, understanding of happiness, which I think is so different from what people today think of it. People today tend to think of happiness as temporary personal comfort and ease, when really, classically in Christian, in the Christian tradition, happiness is, Aristotle famously defined it as the activity of the soul in accord with virtue. The idea being that, of course, the way that we feel, our passions are fleeting, but something that endures, an enduring, state of the soul that is in consonant with, in harmony with nature, with God, is somebody who's trying to order their lives in alignment with, the precepts that God and nature have set out for them. And this is something that is, of course, classically American as well. We have, the pursuit of happiness as part of our founding documents. But the founders, as in line with those classical philosophers, really thought of happiness not as making myself feel comfortable every bit of every day, but really, what is it that I am doing to become a better and more perfect person? And I really think it's very evident that, if you were to frame this poll question that way, which of course the studied author didn't do, they just let people define their own happiness, which is fine. But I think if they did a little bit more dialed into the concept of happiness, and they would, I think, get even higher numbers for married and mothers, because as Dr. Twenge points out in her article, marriage and motherhood may not be comfortable. They are definitely way more challenging than being a single person, but they also call you to a higher version of yourself, and they constantly challenge you to rise to the occasions, to the difficulties presented to you by needing to love and care for other people who are in your life who you cannot get rid of.
Right. And some of the questions do get to some of that. I'm recalling this from memory, so I might be wrong about the exact statistic, but they did ask these women that they surveyed about meaning and purpose. And so much of that gets to what true happiness is, which is like, it's not just about self-fulfillment. It's about like investing in another. And it was something like 30% of married women with children reported having more of a purpose or meaning, and only 15% of unmarried and childless women reported having the same thing. And I think that's where some of this happiness, at least what they're labeling it as happiness, where it comes from. I'm curious, Joy. Now, I think a lot of people probably think that this meaning and purpose is what's driving this sort of big family trend. And for some people, I'm sure that that's the case. There's a book, Hannah's Children, that's relatively new, that gets to some of this. But there are also some other really bizarre social status symbol reasons that seem to be fueling this new trend behind big families. Joy, you have a big family. So I want to get your thoughts on this recent article by the Financial Times. It's called The Ultimate Status Symbol, A Big Family. A flex of uber wealth in 2025 is multiple children, all the while preserving pre-parenthood lifestyles, interests, and physique. Joey, you have 6 kids, so that's fair to say that is a big family. I would not say that the style of this article necessarily describes your family, because you are not out here on Instagram in a milkmaid dress giving us content of you rearing your 6 children. So I really want to know what your thoughts on this article are, good, bad, or otherwise, about the big family trend.
I think if anybody sees a picture of me in a milkmaid dress, you can be assured it was done by AI. That ain't never happening, sister. But I mean, so I think actually this kind of ties actually back right into our discussion of the birth control article, because I personally avoided hormonal birth control just first actually about concern for the health effects of it. It seemed to me completely unnatural. I mean, although it sounds great, it also seemed very curious to just kind of like end your cycle, you know, or reduce it down to almost nothing, a little bit of spotting occasionally. And so, you know, based on that, I just was suspicious of it from the beginning. And now I'm so grateful that kind of staved me off long enough to get to the point where I, you know, was able to read some research that really showed that hormonal birth control, including IUDs, which is something I've been considering, have abortifacient effects. So they can starve a tiny baby to death inside your body, which is something for me is completely, you know, that doesn't comport with my ethical values, with my Christian beliefs. And so I'm so grateful that basically God spared me from that almost, you know, without me having any knowledge that, you know, he was doing that for me. But the result, of course, was 6 children, because they are right. When you do the thing that married people do and you have a relatively healthy body, chances are babies are going to happen. And so that happened for me and my husband. And so, I mean, I like to tell people that only one of the kids was, you know, all of us 5 of them were unplanned. Which to me is very, very funny. I was telling a friend at the pool the other day, like basically I agreed to have one child begrudgingly as part of the contract in order to get my husband to marry me. He, you know, while we were dating, he hinted that he wanted children and I was planning to really have none, but I really, really was in love with this super handsome guy. And it turns out that was a great decision for me because he's a wonderful husband and father. And we are very happy in a completely different way than I had expected when I was that young woman really scared of fertility. I mean, I'll say, I mean, fertility is still scary, right? You know, and if you know, anytime like your body can be commandeered by another being and you're, you know, you have to all of a sudden jump into feeding them, taking care of them, attending to their needs 24/7, pretty much for the next 30 years, you know, that's a big deal. And I think people are right to recognize that. But what they don't recognize is that just babies are awesome. You know, so I haven't had a baby for 5 years, which is kind of a miracle because I had the first 6 in 8 years, or sorry, 9 years. So I know I was nursing for like 10 and a half years straight. Totally ridiculous. But
so many hours, Joy. That is so many hours.
It is so many hours. I like to tell, I mean, I think probably 75% of my professional output was generated with a baby in one arm. You know, it's just crazy. So it's a wild life. And I mean, so the Financial Times article talks about, like the Kardashians apparently have 10 housekeepers, nannies, you know, babysitters. What's the fake Hilaria, the Baldwins?
Yes.
The Baldwins,
how you say.
Yeah, how do you say cucumber or whatever? She's never gonna outlive that one. But they apparently have like 4 nannies. I've never had a nanny, you know, so I'm doing it all with the babies around, which is, I mean, I tell you, if we would allow our family to be a reality show, it would be ridiculous. But we're not going to do that to our children and our relationship. But all this, I mean, so I don't feel like it's any kind of status symbol at all, because just by virtue of not wanting to kill children, this kind of happened to me. And so rather than, you know, responding with the horrors of murder or turning myself into, you know, to a killing field for kids, I decided, well, you know, I think that is way worse than just accepting them. And they're beautiful. I mean, I would say that my first child was probably my scariest in terms of like not knowing what I was getting into and really switching my mind around from, you know, like thinking, oh, I was going to be a career woman with no children, you know, to, okay, I guess now I'm not going to do that again. What's it going to look like? But he, I mean, you know, now 15 years later, he's gorgeous. Like, he's just so beautiful. He is really smart. He's really responsible. He loves his family. He's extremely goofy. You know, like when I look at that child, I have tears in my eyes, and I'm so, so, so glad that I had that boy. And I feel that way about every one of my kids. And I think if you come to a place where you regret those kids, and you know, like you can look them in the eyes and regret them, then you really need to go see a psychologist, because they're beautiful and they're wonderful and they change your life in all the best ways. And you know, and even though it's been quite a ride and it has not been all pleasant every second of the way, and it's, you know, still not every day, it's absolutely worth it.
I think this podcast just generated a really good idea for Federalist exclusive subscriber content, and that is a reality television show that features Joy parenting her 6 kids. I think that is a really good idea for, I'm going to tell our bosses about that one.
I will never forget when I was like,
Gossip reality show, because my youngest guy is the most effective at getting around. Like, I post guards on my door when I'm recording videos, and that little guy, he has gotten around his daddy like multiple times. He's gotten through locked doors. So, you know, if we just do enough recordings, that there will be little blonde heads popping up here.
We might catch a glimpse.
I'll never forget, like, early on when I had recently joined the Federalist, I think I was having a phone call with Joy, and I had a phone call with Joy, and she had just come off the radio, and this was like supposed to be a 5-minute radio hit. I think they had like kept her on answering questions for like 45 minutes or something. And as she's on the radio, her children are like running out and playing in the mud in the front yard. And then I think they got stuck. And so like literally she's on the radio, but during the commercial break, she like goes outside and picks up her child and like leaves I'm just imagining like
stuck
in the mud and like carries the child to the bathroom, deposits the child in the bathtub, and then like is back on air by the time the commercial break is over. And so Joy's telling me right after it happened, and I was like, what kind of women am I working with?
Insane. That is awesome. That is so awesome. Well, okay, I think that's why this article, I thought it was good and bad, because it talks about the big family being a status symbol. And it depends how you define status symbol. Like, if you mean rich in life, like in the ways that we think of being rich, like soul rich and like rich with experiences and rich with posterity and, you know, all of the things that actually matter, then yeah, a big family is like the best thing you could ever achieve. But I think in this article, it's talking about it being a status symbol as like, yeah, look at all of these rich people who also have all of these kids, and they can still keep their perfect lifestyles and their perfect physiques, and, you know, they can pay for all of this childcare or whatever. And it's like, I think actually, you know, the people who are actually having big families, like it requires you to sacrifice something of yourself in a big way, more so than just having 1 kid or 2 kids, you know, more so than just keeping maybe at the replacement rate. It's like setting aside those other status things that you maybe would otherwise want to have instead be rich in a very different way. And I think that's kind of why the article seemed a little bit off to me, because, you know, the ballerina farm family might be doing great, but it's like, that's not real life. They're not. Yeah. What were you going to say, Joy?
It kind of indicated that, you know, a baby is something that requires a vast amount of financial resources. Mm-hmm. And look, I get that millennials, right? The inflation, the college debt, the home prices, you know, the boomers have pensions and we don't. Like, I get all of that background, right? But at the same time, and my husband and I are not wealthy, you know, we provide for our kids. Great. I'm very grateful, you know, to the Federalist and to my husband's employment. You know, we definitely can have food on the table, and I don't have to worry about that. But, you know, we're not Jay-Z, you know, we're not Elon Musk by any stretch of the means. And all the kids are fine. You know, yes. And I know many families who are on one income who have as many or more children than we do, and they have wonderful children. The children mm-hmm. do not need to have, you know, Elon Musk levels of money. And in fact, I kind of wonder if, I mean, especially in Elon Musk's case, sometimes having the money is a barrier to being a good dad, because it gives you this fiction that you can just buy a substitute parent. You know, yes. Elon is having his babies with women that how much FaceTime can he possibly spend with 14 children with 7 different mothers? There's just no way that those children are getting the kind of parenting that my husband is giving to our 6 children. And, you know, it's spending hours and hours, you know, personally being with them. And when they cry, he can hear them. You know, when they mm-hmm. wake up in the middle of the night, his mommy, our children's mommy and daddy, we are there for them. That is not true for Elon Musk kids. And and when kids are raised in an environment like that, I wish them the best. I want the best for them. Sometimes you can escape the odds, but the odds are that children who are raised in those environments without their father present for them, married to their mother, those kids grow up to be very sad, and they're disproportionately represented among every indicator of depression, anxiety, and violence that exists out there.
Mm-hmm. Right. Children have a natural right to their mother and father, not one of 10 caretakers around the clock in the Kardashian home. Right.
Right. And that's actually why, I've chosen to, because God gave me the kids and we aren't willing to kill them. And I also know the children need bonding with their mother. So we don't have a nanny because I think the children need me. And yeah, it means I can't be on TV. It means that I've got a little guy right now peeking around, the door, of my office with his eyes very big, thinking, okay, at least he has enough age and self-presence to be quiet right now. Right. But that, you can't have a high flying sort of career and be that committed to that many children. The two are really mutually exclusive. And so, I do what I can. I'm very grateful that I'm able, to have flexible work. But the truth is, I can't have the kind of career that some would have without children. The two are incompatible. But I think, and look, this is a life that's been given to me, right? I didn't necessarily choose to have the kids. They've been given to me as a gift. So it's now just, my job and everybody else's job, who has children, to try to fulfill that responsibility as best as we can. But the bottom line there is, I don't begrudge anyone a high flying career, but I think our society would be better off if more people would put most of their energies into their families, as opposed and use the career as a subsidiary to the family. The point of the career being to help the family to flourish, rather than one's particular ego needs or just financial needs or whatever the case is. Really, the family should be the reason that we have a career at all.
Right. And I do think that that starts with being honest about the reality that women are generally happier and more fulfilled when they are married and have children. And I think it was the Atlantic article, but maybe it was a different one that we talked about. I read too many, I don't remember. But she talked about how when she was considering whether to have children, everywhere she looked, it was only messaging that was dissuading her from having children, not that encouraged her about why it was wonderful. And so I think it's really important for men and women to hear from people like you, Joy, who have big, full, wonderful lives with 6 kids. Because sure, there are trade-offs, but it's really such a wonderful thing and it provides so much meaning. And so, yeah, I love to see these surveys and I love to hear from people like you, because I think we need to hear more of that.
If I couldn't have my job and have my kids, I would pick the kids every time. But that's now in hindsight, right? I could have never known that before all the kids came along. And I think the vast majority of people, if they were honest, would say the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the research shows that. Well, I think we should give her little guy his mom back. So I'm going to wrap this up, but I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I think there's a lot of good stuff here. So thank you both for joining me, and I hope to have you both again very soon.
Thanks, Kylee.
Anytime.
All right, before I wrap up, I have to play an absolutely absurd statement that Democrat Senator Tim Kaine made during a confirmation hearing this week. Take a look.
The notion that rights don't come from laws and don't come from the government, but come from the creator, that's what the Iranian government believes. It's a theocratic regime that bases its rule on Shia law and targets Sunnis, Baha'is, Jews, Christians, and other religious minorities. And they do it because they believe that they understand what natural rights are from their creator. So the statement that our rights do not come from our laws or our governments is extremely troubling.
As several people have pointed out on X, Kaine even gets his facts about Iran wrong, considering that the Ayatollah is the supreme authority on rights, even superseding religious law. But way more troubling is that this United States senator, who claims to be a devout Catholic, by the way, doesn't understand basic doctrines of the Christian faith or this country's most foundational documents and principles. For crying out loud, it's right there in some of the opening lines of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government. In other words, it is obvious that every single person is bestowed with rights from the creator that cannot be taken away from them, and that government's function isn't to give people those rights, it's to protect the God-given rights they naturally have, including the rights to life and liberty. Tim Kaine also must have missed the history lesson laying out the debates between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, where the Anti-Federalists insisted that certain rights needed to be explicitly enumerated because they feared that the government would be tyrannical, whereas the Federalists argued that these human rights were inherent, that the Constitution, by limiting the power of the government, inherently protected rights. Why? Because those rights didn't come from government in the first place. They came from God. Of course, they came to a compromise to gain support for the Constitution, but they all understood natural law and the fact that our rights to speak, to assemble, to practice our faith and associate with whom we want, the right to life, the right to defend ourselves and our families, the right to be secure in our property and persons. These rights didn't originate from the government. So no, Tim Kaine, the idea that our rights come from God isn't what's extremely troubling. What's troubling is that a prominent U.S. senator from the other major political party in this country thinks the government and lawmakers like himself give us our rights. They don't. But it's really no wonder that people like Tim Kaine are so keen on taking certain rights away, like the right to life, the right to keep and bear arms, the right to call boys boys or girls girls, or the right to assemble with your local church, even when there's a virus making the rounds. If rights came from the government, then there's no reason the government can't take those rights away. But luckily, they don't. I think a lot of this rhetoric comes from Democrats seeing Christian nationalism and theocracy everywhere they look. Here's a Politico reporter last year saying the same kind of nonsense as Tim Kaine.
And the one thing that unites all of them, because there's many different groups orbiting Trump, but the thing that unites them as Christian nationalists, not Christians, by the way, because Christian nationalists is very different, is that they believe that our rights as Americans, as all human beings, don't come from any earthly authority. They don't come from Congress. They don't come from the Supreme Court. They come from God.
These talking points are false. They're anti-Christian, they're historically illiterate, and they're un-American. And anyone who subscribes to these beliefs is not fit to serve an American government. And to take this one step further, if you're out there trashing Tim Kaine, but also trashing faithful Christians who desire to see biblical morality influence America's laws to protect God-given rights, then you've completely missed the plot. Because neither our God-given rights nor the laws of this country are abstractions. We can't treat them like they are. Sean Davis made this point beautifully on X today. If our rights come from God, and they do, then the laws protecting those rights will be consistent with God's standards for human flourishing. And this reality just exposes the absurdity of believing that desiring laws that reflect Christian morality is Christian nationalism or Christians wrongly pursuing power. It's ridiculous. So yes, Tim Kaine is ignorant to think that the rights of human beings who are made in the image of God don't come from their creator. But equally ignorant are the folks who say that God, the source of our rights, should have no bearing on the laws and the policies we enact to secure those rights. On that incredibly light and happy note, that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the Kylee Cast. I will be right back here next week with more. Until then, just remember, the truth hurts, but it won't kill you.